Welcome back to Black News Tonight. It is no secret many black Americans are disgruntled with the Democratic Party. They feel like they're taken for granted, and time again, voting as the most united bloc African Americans are. But at the end, the demands of black people remain unfulfilled by the Democratic leadership. In a recent Newsweek opinion article, contributor Pamela Denise Long declares it is time for black America to break up with the Democratic Party. She goes on to say, if they want our votes, let them earn them. And Pamela Denise Long joins me now. She is diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism trainer. She's also a brilliant writer, clearly. Welcome to the show. Good to see you. You call black Americans voting for the Democratic Party an arranged marriage. Now you're calling for a divorce. Tell me why.
Yeah, so it's an arranged marriage because, as I clarified in the article, Black Americans back in the day when Republicans and Democrats kind of switched their platforms didn't really have a choice if they were going to stay engaged with American politics. And at that time in the 60s, obviously it was very critical that they do. And it's very critical now that Black Americans stay engaged with the political process as well. Democrats have not delivered, even though they've had the House, both houses, as well as the White House. They haven't delivered specifically for Black Americans, and also quite specifically for descendants of slavery who make up the vast majority of the Black American population.
You say that while progressives accuse the right of not talking about anti-black racism, when the left does talk about anti-black racism, they do so to use our pain, not for our benefit. That's a quote from you. It sounds like you're criticizing the kind of performative gestures toward racial justice that we often see from the left. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so, it's both performative in terms of the wordsmithing that happens, as well as in terms of how we haven't disaggregated the data on the impact of the policies that are being implemented at the level that is not to pass or minimize the impact the impact and responsibility that state as well as regional and local governments have. What I mean by that is I need to see specific implementation plans that show that these diversity policies are actually transforming the lives and economic stability of Black American communities, Black American homes, and Black American families and workers. So this idea of it being performative, as well as it not being precise in who it is intended to impact and how. It is, I think, a dereliction of duty if we levy the responsibility of looking at impact on foundations and not-for-profit organizations. Our government, who created many of the problems, right, that are affecting multi-generational Black Americans, need to be responsible for looking at and developing those metrics, ensuring that that impact is positive.
I understand and even agree with the critique of the Democratic Party's relationship to black people. It's exploitative, they take us for granted. And at the analytic level, we are a captured electorate. That is to say, they know they got us. If we vote, we voting for them. I get that. But we have a few practical options. That's what people will push back and say, right? That the realpolitik is that we either don't vote, we vote for an alternative party, or we vote for Republicans. And that voting for an alternative party doesn't give us the power to defeat Republicans in major elections, maybe in a local election, a mayoralty is probably the best case scenario. And that if we vote Republican, or at least hold out the possibility that we'll vote Republican, that we may get more from the Democratic Party, but we're kind of cutting our nose to spite our face because Republicans don't serve our interests in any way. So how, as a practical matter, can we leverage our votes in different ways when the options, the alternatives are so bad?
Yeah, those are very, very valid points. And I often hear that critique. I think one of the things that we as a people, and I mean that by the American people, one of the things that we've done is we've let the polls determine the narrative. We have let the polar ends, the extremes of both parties determine our direction, right? They've been the gatekeepers. The bulk of the American public is in the middle. The bulk of the American public doesn't want ideology. What they actually want is solutions. populations. They actually want the same things Black Americans want, which is for people, families, and communities to be resourced. So that's first, is we, the majority, truly the majority of the American people, have to set the narrative. We, as Black Americans, as well as white American, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, all voting Americans, really need to say that it is no longer acceptable that you can determine your party orientation and decide based on that alone which segments of the American population you're going to choose to neglect. The challenge, the new paradigm is we're all going to eat. And if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, how are you going to ensure specific redress to specific folks, Black Americans being the ones that we're talking about tonight, to ensure that we can all thrive? That has not been the narrative. I know that is similar to what Democrats have talked about, but we aren't seeing that translated into Black communities, are we? So even they aren't there yet.
So how do we convince Black voters to do this? I mean, I'm just thinking about, again, a practical context. And you're talking to somebody who's been a member of the Green Party for 2 decades. So I'm not here caping for the Democrats. I'm just trying to make sort of think through how we can convince voters of this. Let's say in the 2020 election, right? Let's say we're in a state like Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, where there was a legitimate chance that a particular member of the House or the Senate could have won, or in the governor's house, right? They could have won on the Democrat side and the Republican side. And let's say that the Republican makes a more persuasive argument. Let's say in Georgia, for example, the Republican had made a more persuasive argument than Raphael Warnock. And you say, well, look, he has Black interests at heart, or she has Black interests at heart more than this Democratic candidate. And Black people decide to put their weight behind the Republican candidate in that case, or the third party candidate in that case. I get the logic of saying we're going to set the example, but then you lose control of the Senate, right? The Democrats control the Senate by a hair, right? We need Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. So if that is in fact the case, are we having a small victory or a symbolic victory, maybe even a Pyrrhic victory, if we choose the Republican but lose the Senate, or choose the Republican and empower them on a national scale to do tremendous amounts of harm? Do we say, look, Joe Biden clearly doesn't have a progressive agenda for Black folk, but there's Donald Trump on the one hand, there's the Green Party candidate on the other, there's the Freedom Party candidate on the other, or whomever. How in an election like 2020 could we have strategically employed what you're talking about?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think one thing we needed to start with this campaigning and this shifting in narrative about who gets neglected and who gets well served at the beginning, to move the candidates toward the middle instead of these polar opposites moving the population, the voting population toward their polls. So first of all, elections are a sort of culmination or milestone in the overall political process. So we have to start developing these narratives now, right? And to be, just for the record, I'm not caping for anyone except Black America, right? Except for America in general, because what we cannot continue to do is have Black America at the bottom and continuing to need support, continuing to cry out for assistance and support when our government has failed us. I think we need to, divorcing or breaking up is not saying that you have to go with Republicans. What it does say is that your vote is up for sale to the highest bidder who is going to have an agenda for you. And moving people to the middle says that if we are about America thriving, not just Black people need to demand this, all Americans need to demand this. Black Americans have used our voice, our civil rights gains, to support every social justice movement. We are owed, America needs this, and we are due.
Agreed 100%. Denise, thank you so much for your brilliant analysis and also for the wonderful article you contributed today. We look forward to talking to you again soon in Black News Tonight. Everybody